Delen sila lumen omentielvo. Today I bring to you all a history of Harad and the Haradrim. As all men, those who would become the Haradrim would awake in the land of Hildorian at the first rising of the sun. But unlike those of the Edain, the Haradrim stayed and migrated southwards in Middle-earth, and thus avoided the conflicts of the First Age. But the power of evil would work its way to the Haradrim in the form of Sauron. The Dark Lord lay dormant for centuries, but slowly began to amass power and influence in Harad. But it was at this time that Aldarion made many voyages across the sea and met with the Haradrim. The Númenóreans were great men and showed and taught the Haradrim things such as metalwork. But this positive influence from Númenor would not last, as the once great island fell into darkness itself. The lands of Harad were taken as colonies for the Númenóreans, who sought power and wealth in those lands. The Haradrim were now caught between the hammer and the anvil, as now Harad fell to two influences, Númenor and Sauron. The last king of Númenor, Ar-Pharazôn, went to war against Sauron and took the Dark Lord. But Pharazôn became a puppet for Sauron, and soon Haradrim were being rounded up and sent to Númenor, never to return. For the island fell to Melkor worship and practiced the evil of human sacrifice. For these actions, the Haradrim would forever hate the Númenóreans and their descendants. Númenor would sink beneath the sea, and much of her influence over Harad vanished. But Sauron had not perished in the downfall and returned to Mordor. He now held complete sway over the Haradrim, being their god king. Some of the wicked Númenóreans had survived in their colonies, and now became lords among the Haradrim. The Haradrim would participate in the War of the Last Alliance, and would witness Sauron's first fall. The Haradrim could finally be free from evil. But at this time, after years of enslavement and oppression, the Haradrim found evil in their hearts, and a hatred of the Dunedain, Gondor and Arnor. During the early years of the Third Age, the Havens of Umbar became a strong, powerful nation amongst the Harad. In an attempt of foregoing past grievances, Teranon Falastor married the woman Boruthiel of Umbar. But this loveless marriage only caused issues in Gondor and resulted in her banishment. Eärnil, Teranon's nephew, would launch an invasion in 933 and capture the Havens of Umbar. The lords of Umbar escaped and found favor among the kings of Harad, and so they built up their forces, waiting for the moment to attack. That time came in 1015, when the king Kiriandil was at the Havens. The battle was brutal, and the king was killed, but Umbar did not fall back into the hands of Gondor's enemies. Instead, a siege was laid upon the Havens, as neither side had the strength to end the war. 45 years later, Kiriaher would lead a massive army by land and by sea and crush the Haradrim and her Black Númenórean allies. The kings of Harad, in order to keep the peace, would give their sons as hostages and live in Gondor for much of their youth. Trade would become great amongst these two peoples. In this time, there would be two beings who wandered to Harad cloaked in blue. These were the Blue Wizards, and while legends persist of the Blue Wizards arriving in the Second Age, they reappeared in the Third. Their goal was to rid the Haradrim of the evil influences of Sauron, and while it is unknown how successful the Blue Wizards were, rumors suggest that the strength of the enemy in Harad was lesser than it could have been. For generations, the Haradrim would be under the domain of Gondor, but a fierce and bloody civil war broke out in Gondor, the Kinstrife. Though the true king, Eldacar, would win the war and kill his usurper Castamir, rebel forces escaped and fled to the Havens of Umbar and made it a stronghold for the enemies of Gondor, and thus many of the Haradrim would ally with Umbar in war against Gondor. The Corsairs' war with Gondor would never truly end, as both parties would attack or raid each other throughout the rest of the Third Age. And while Gondor would come out on top in many of these conflicts, they could never fully subdue the Haradrim again. Most devastating of these wars was the Wainrider War. In 1944, an army from Harad and Khand joined the Easterling Wainriders in an invasion of Gondor. While the Wainriders won a great victory on the Morannon, the Haradrim would be routed in Ithilien. This same army would defeat the Wainriders and win the war. At some point in this time, Gondor's control over Umbar waned, and the Haradrim became the new lords of these coastlands. During the long winter, Corsairs launched several invasion fleets against Gondor and her ally Rohan, but were defeated by the armies of Gondor. Conflict would continue to persist among the Haradrim and Gondorians. Neither side could gain a permanent advantage in the wars, and oftentimes all that happened was an invasion army was defeated. South Gondor, known as Harandor, became the new battleground between the two sides. In 2885, the Haradrim, convinced by servants of Sauron in Mordor, attacked Gondor, advancing up the Poros River into Ithilien. The Gondorians, with their ally Rohan, would drive the invaders out of Ithilien, and in the Battle of the Crossings of Poros, defeated the Haradrim, though at a great cost to Rohan, who lost the two princes of Fulstred and Fastred. This devastating defeat ended Haradrim invasions for a long time. In the days of Ecthelion II, steward of Gondor, the Corsairs were seen as the chief threat to Gondor, and an ambush of their great ports occurred, which destroyed the Corsair fleet. The man who led this venture was Thorongil, and after this victory he left Gondor and journeyed into Harad. There is little report of Thorongil's adventures in Harad, but by his own account he uncovered and foiled the plots of Sauron as he could. Despite Gondor's victories over the centuries against the Harad, the men of the south would still be ready for war. The War of the Ring broke out in 3018, and the Haradrim joined Sauron. Haradrim from all over the southern lands came into the Dark Lord's service, but not all were willing participants. Along the long road to Mordor, many Haradrim companies would be ambushed by the Ithilien Rangers and slain. Sauron's forces were now built up with not just orcs, but Easterlings, Haradrim, Corsairs, and anyone else the Dark Lord could control or persuade. On March 11th, the Second Battle of Osgiliath began, and the Gondorians were pushed back to the walls of Minas Tirith. On the 15th, the Battle of the Pelennor Fields began, when the riders of Rohan charged onto the battlefield. The Haradrim's cavalry was overwhelmed, and their chieftain, the Black Serpent, was slain by Theoden. But victory for the Free Peoples was still far from reach. Gothmog, the lieutenant of the Witch King, sent forth all the armies at his disposal. Thousands of Haradrim marched forth and nearly overwhelmed the Rohirrim. At that moment, when the end seemed near, ships appeared in the distance. These were not the Corsairs the servants of Sauron were expecting, but an army of Gondorians under the helm of Thorongil returned under his true name of Aragorn. The armies of Sauron were destroyed, and few returned to their master. The war, however, was not yet won. Many more armies awaited in Mordor, and unless the One Ring was destroyed, Sauron would have victory. On the 25th of March, the Battle of the Morannon began and ended. The ring was destroyed and victory for the Free Peoples achieved. The evil power that held the Haradrim enslaved was broken. Many fled or surrendered to the host of the West, but a few with evil and hatred in their hearts fought until the bitter end. The war was at last over. Sauron's influence over the Haradrim was ended. Several emissaries from Harad would be sent to Aragorn's crowning as Elisar to broker peace between the two peoples. But the evil that had influenced Harad for millennium would not be eradicated in one day, and so from time to time, war would break out between those of Harad and the men of the West. And yet peace would eventually occur, and over time the memories of Sauron would fade from the hearts of the Haradrim. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. As always, feel free to like and subscribe for more content, and please let me know how I can better improve these videos. Thanks, and as the elves say, Namarie.